clear
DEI and the rise of the modern slur. Oh, banger. Garrison Hayes, great videos, great TikToks.
that when President Donald Trump and his allies
Asman made you look dumb. Go suck a terrorist dick. Why are you fantasizing about me sucking another man's penis? That's kind of gay, big dog. You good? Coming across a little fruity in here. What's happening? Are there some other fantasies that you have that you would like to elaborate on? Some more fantasies for you, big sir? I'm horny and I'm mad. I just thought about you. I just imagined you having sex with a man. Oh. It's kind of funny how they admit that people on the left have the correct position on different topics, but reject that correct opinion because it's too nice. Yet on the left, we never assume someone is lying to be perceived in a good light. At most, we will assume they're a grifter. And now what they're saying is wrong / damaging society, but simply doesn't care because it makes them money. And likely they want it to be true too. Yeah. Not gonna lie, if the being of reflective communities thing was real, Hasan Abi would definitely be Hasan Abai. Yeah, that's true. My brother and many colleagues whose political views I constantly challenge, thanks to you, see DEI as a problem because they believe DEI is as implemented in corporate hiring practices led to more bad outcomes than good outcomes. Meritocracy. Oh, you're saying I'm giving you the tools to duke them out in the marketplace of ideas. Asm's almost double your size now. Seems like a majority agrees with the Roach King. Yeah. Twitch is not necessarily super populated. So content creators on this platform have always been larger than me. That's not a new thing. I'm one of the largest content creators, but Asmongold's always been a larger content creator than me. In terms of like that reflecting the broader outlook, that being reflective of like of more people being right wing, I think that you're not wrong. There is some truth to that. I think, especially with the Trump stuff, there are a lot more people that are openly right wing, want more right wing commentary. It's true. I think time will change. As a lot of the things that the Trump administration is doing, like this, unironically, will cause people to recognize how damaging the Trump initiatives have been. It's just simply going to take some time. There was a point in time where I think Twitch was definitely, out of all of the platforms. What? So H3 treats you like shit, so you turn around and do it to others? How don't you see this flaw? 40-month sub here, and it sucks seeing this? What are you talking about? Who am I treating like shit? What? Yeah, Asmin's main channel was a 100K viewer channel. Like, what do you mean when you said he's bigger now? He was bigger before he made Zagar's main channel. What the fuck? No, I agree. I literally said Asmongold's always been a bigger content creator than me. There's never been a moment where Asmongold was a smaller content creator than me, ever. And there are still plenty of content creators who are bigger than me. But having said that, in terms of Asmongold's new, like, Asmongold never did majority political commentary. This is a new thing, right? And as far as this being a new thing and what that is reflective of, I think that yes, there is a lot of appetite for pro-Trump content on this platform for sure. Didn't he start way before you too? Yeah, of course. There's a genuine fear that Twitch may have right now in taking proactive action. Things will have to get worse. A manifesto is going to mention him eventually. What? To be fair, making fun of Asman hardly leaving the house is a bit harsh. Some people do have mental health issues. What? Do you think I'm being ableist when I make fun of Asmongold not leaving his house unless it's to fucking get Whataburger? Amazing. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. All right. California elite wouldn't say the same thing about In-N-Out law. Yeah, it's not the Whataburger versus In-N-Out that is the joke here. Anyway. I'm not going to play this fucking manly man gamer poop song. What is wrong with you? Why do you keep fucking demanding that I watch this video? You and most other leftists are hypocrites and never hesitate to bully others that don't subscribe 100% to your beliefs. Yeah, no, I've never been shy of bullying people. Yeah. Are you new here? Yes. Yes. Notice how the people that I'm bullying, I'm not bullying due to some unchangeable quality. Like, I don't bully people for, I know a lot of people are going to be shocked when they find this out, but when I make fun of a white dude that's out of touch, I'm not bullying them because they're white. I'm bullying them because they're out of touch. Or when I make fun of someone, it's usually due to their bad opinions. It's not because they're disabled, or it's not because they are, from a marginalized background, if they're like black or brown or something like that. But also, I don't understand, like, yeah, are you guys like the Giga Chads, or are you the small bean that's getting bullied? Like, what's happening here? But having said that, I never said I was like a super kind person. If that's what you thought I was because of my politics, you're wrong. I don't think I'm a very kind person at all. I'm very unkind, as a matter of fact, to people that are being unkind to others. That is part of the reason why I have a lot of fucking haters online, like a lot, an insane amount. I don't even think socialism is about kindness in general. Yeah. I'm just not going to go out of my way to shit on a vulnerable population. That's it. I'm not going to go out of my way to. I'm not going to go out of my way to actively target people that have less than me. I will, however, shit on people that are doing that to others. That's not Kaya. No, that's Kaya. Kaya. Hi. Hi, Kaya. This is Kaya. Look at that tail. No, this is Fifi, the mayor of the dog park. Yeah, Kaya, I fat shamed her and she lost all the weight. All right, we had the RFK video, but I kind of don't want to watch that. Let's watch the DEI and the rise of the modern slur.
Use the term DEI, they mean it as a slur, primarily against black people.
True.
But they are absolutely willing to include your group too.
DEI is gone. DEI is a crime.
On DEI and the claims that you've made, are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring?
We want somebody that's psychologically superior.
Now, black people have been saying this for quite some time, that certain terms are being weaponized against us, terms that may on the surface seem neutral, but are ultimately not neutral at all.
They called you, some critics did, the DEI mayor.
We know how ridiculous that is.
They are, in a very real sense, slurs, but for the sake of clarity, I'll be calling them modern slurs, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. But in order to truly understand the way that modern slurs work, you have to talk about the slur of all slurs in America, the word nigger.
Well then, get away from the door.
This is the rise and hopefully fall of the modern slur. Let's dig in. This video is sponsored by Ground News. More on that later. I made a full video on the N-word that you should absolutely watch next, but I want to revisit this word from a different perspective. A question that I've had for some time is why the N-word is so bad. I know how it made me feel when bigots online or on video games or in person have used it against me. But the question is, how did this word, this slur, come to be so particularly infamous in America? Well, the answer is actually very simple. It was intended to be that way. A little backstory. And I'm gonna go ahead and warn you that I will be saying the N-word a lot in this video.
Why is this word used so frequently?
So go ahead, just brace yourself, turn the volume all the way up. You know, in public, no headphones.
I've used it. Nigga. That, you know, nigga.
Good time to come back.
Yes, nigga. Nigga, please. Nigga. You know, can you lend a nigga a pencil?
Ethically reacting, ethically stepping out of the room during the slur so he doesn't hear it. Yeah, I had to leave for the slurs.
Etymologists believe that the word nigger was derived from an English word negger that was itself derived from negro, the Spanish word for black, as in the color. And I think this is important because the word did not have a negative connotation originally. We're gonna come back to that a little bit later.
Bro, during Black History Month, what do you want me to do, man? I'm hyping up a black content creator, okay? Calm down.
This word was at one time across multiple cultures, spellings, and pronunciations, simply a descriptor of an African person, a person with darker brown skin. We can have a deeper conversation about whether or not black was even the appropriate term to call these folks who are very obviously brown, but this is coming from a group of people who began to call themselves white. So color perception was not their strength. But according to Randall Kennedy, by the late 1830s, the term had become a familiar and influential insult, a slur. We actually know this because in 1837, Hosea Easton, a free black man in New England, was one of the first intellectuals to write about the word this way. He said, is an opprobrious term employed to impose contempt upon black people as an inferior race. The term itself would be perfectly harmless were it used only.
Holy shit. In all of my years, I actually did not know like when the term was invented. I always joke like, oh, Noam Chomsky was there when the term was invented. Turns out he literally was there. He's old enough. He was there when the ancient tombs were dusted off.
To distinguish one group from another, but it is not used with that intent. It flows from the fountain of purpose to injure. And this is the key. The word was at one point just a descriptor, but through an intentional effort to make it something else, it became the N-word that we know today. The history of this word is bloody. To be a is to, in the mind of the bigot, deserve dehumanization, lynchings, terrorization, bombings, mob violence. For the white racist and those that love them had this coming.
What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger, I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. The question you got to ask yourself, the white population of this country has got to ask itself, if I'm not the nigger here, and you invented him, you, the white people, invented him, then you got to find out why.
But as they do, times changed. The success of the civil rights movement meant that being overtly bigoted wasn't okay anymore.
I mean, this is going to have the Lee Atwater quote, right? I mean, this is where we're getting to, which is as a anthropologist of rare and unique racism and dog whistles, as someone who is as I've said, racism sommelier, I know where this video is going, let me tell you. And you also know where this video is going because you've heard me mention this many times.
The use of terms like in this new polite society would get you fired, require an apology tour, and mark you as a person outside of the mainstream for the rest of your days. Kind of.
Like a fine wine.
And I'm not changing.
And as a result, I think that people started to believe that racism was either a thing of the past or something that would altogether die off once all the old, stuck in their ways bigots went to their graves. Which is a nice idea, quaint even. But that isn't how the world works. Racist ideas are routinely rebranded into something more palatable for every generation. And the current DEI discourse is exactly that. DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, describes programs, policies, and practices that are designed to make environments, usually workplaces or educational institutions, more fair and welcoming to folks who have been historically excluded from those institutions. Think Black people, women, veterans, immigrants, folks with disabilities, queer people. I have my critiques of diversity, equity, and inclusion, mainly that, ironically, it poses no significant threats to the status quo, precisely because it is designed to uphold and serve the status quo. But to be abundantly clear, DEI is an objectively good thing, and the people who stand to benefit from it the most are the highly qualified professionals who would otherwise be overlooked by poor hiring and recruitment practices.
The greatest meme about DEI is like, I don't even like either of these people, obviously, but it's the Lloyd Austin meme. I'm sure Kyle Kalinske, who's been going on a tear reposting boomer ass memes, has probably posted it at some point. But it's like, yeah, I think it's like Lloyd Austin being called a DEI pick with his insane qualifications to be the Secretary of Defense next to Pete Hegseth, who is a drunk, abusive, rapist, Fox News TV host. Like, you kind of understand what's happening there at that point, right? Leave Kyle out of this? No, I mean, he has been posting a lot of boomer memes. Some of them are very funny, but they are very boomer. Like, people say Lloyd Austin is a DEI hire. And regardless of your opinion or my opinion on the position as the Secretary of Defense, when you look at like Lloyd Austin's qualifications, you kind of understand why. You kind of understand why, like the concept of DEI exists as a positive. Okay. And then also why DEI is utilized as a weapon to basically be hateful and bigoted and racist by right wingers. The reality of the matter is Black and brown people have often throughout history been overlooked for higher levels of government or just, positions that they certainly have the qualifications for. Okay? That is unironically white guy DEI. Throughout American history, there's never been a moment where people that are not deserving of a position have been elevated to that status, with one exception: white people. Like, that is historically the only time when people have been elevated to a status that they actually are not deserving. And ironically, DEI or affirmative action or initiatives like this, albeit band-aid solutions to massively consequential systemic problems, were a way to address the white guy DEI. That's literally it. So when right-wingers talk about DEI, what they're actually talking about is like, can we go back to white guy DEI, please? And it's also ironic because white guy DEI, at the very least, made a bunch of poor white people feel like they were a part of the in-group when they're not. Because the actual DEI, as a pejorative, if you consider DEI to be an elevation to a position that is unwarranted or undeserved, has always been done on the boundaries of class. But white guy DEI has made poor white people, at the very least, feel like they got some skin in the game. Make them feel like they also have some semblance of a leg up, when that could not be further from the truth. This is precisely the reason why, when we have these conversations about affirmative action, nobody dares to touch legacy admissions. No one ever talks about or ever wants to dismantle legacy admissions. Legacy admissions are quite literally the most obvious example of elevating people to a position without proper qualifications. And there are statistics to basically prove this reality. And there are very visible and very famous examples of this reality. George W. Bush, another OG DUI hire, went to Yale. George W. Bush was a fucking moron, okay? And I don't mean like, oh, like Trump, oh, he's like so stupid. Like there are at least like redeemable qualities for Trump because he's like a competent marketer, for example. I would even go so far as to say a brilliant marketer. Whereas George W. Bush had no redeeming qualities. I guess he was like somewhat charismatic and a guy that you can have beer with, but he had no redeemable leadership qualities and was truly a fucking idiot. Okay? Unlike Bush Sr., who was a bloodless, monstrous government stooge, George W. Bush Jr. was very clearly a legacy admission to Yale because his father was the president, and his father also bought a library, if I'm not mistaken, from Yale so that he would go to Yale. Okay? He didn't get there because he was a fantastic scholar. He got there because his dad was both CIA and also the fucking president. Okay? I think he went to college before his dad became president, but still, he was an incredibly wealthy person coming from oil money that was able to put his son into a position that he did not earn. Okay? So just remember that when we talk about DEI or affirmative action or any number of different things. The entire concept revolves around simply not overlooking groups of people that have been historically overlooked and undermined to do the true white guy DEI. That's it.
Reality is that you wouldn't need DEI if workplaces were hiring based on merit and not nepotism in the first place. And yet, the federal government is taking steps to make DEI illegal. And all of this comes on the heels of a years-long effort to demonize diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as a handout for Black people, for women, and queer folks. And this is where the modern slur comes into play. There was a time when DEI was simply the shorthand acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion, a harmless descriptor. But DEI has become a word unto itself for these people. And that word is intended as a modern slur. Modern slurs serve two purposes, but before I share those, I think this is a good time to tell you about today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that gathers related news articles from more than 50,000 sources around the world. All
ethical
in one
reacts.
place,
We're doing
so
ethical
you can
reacts.
compare how different outlets cover the same story. Every story comes with a visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And if you go to ground.news/Garrison Hayes or use the link in the video description or scan the QR code on screen, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan. So much of the political polarization in our time has everything to do with how and where we are getting our news. 2 people could find themselves looking at the same event and coming to 2 totally different conclusions simply because they got their news from 2 different sources. Take, for example, this story about Trump's executive orders around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and declaring that there were only 2 sexes. It's been covered by more than 520 sources, with distribution between left-leaning and right-leaning sources favoring the left just a touch. You can also see the factuality and ownership information. For this story, 50% of the reporting outlets are owned by media conglomerates. You can even compare headlines to see how this bias can affect framing. On the right, most of the headlines frame this story as a good thing. One headline mentions that Trump takes a sledgehammer to gender ideology, while another calls Trump a champion for women's sports. Meanwhile, in the center and on the left, news organizations are taking this on from a different perspective, with some pointing that technically the executive order inadvertently declares everyone is a female. One really cool feature is the blind spot feed, which covers stories underreported by either side of the political spectrum. I think Ground News is a really awesome tool. They aren't trying to change your opinion about the news. They're simply trying to give you more information about where you may be getting your news and help you see where you may have blind spots. Again, go to ground.news/Garrison Hayes or use the link in the video description or the QR code on the screen to subscribe today. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off of the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all of their features. I hope you'll check them out. Thank you to Ground News for supporting this channel. Okay, back to the video. Modern slurs serve 2 purposes. First, they give plausible deniability to bigots. For many folks, especially those in the media, the N-word is this uncrossable line in the sand on the beach of racist slurs. Do something racist plus say the N-word and you are a clear-cut bigot. Do something racist and you didn't say the N-word and things are debatable. Modern slurs do the work of approximating.
Yup, that's a great way to explain it. Hasan, to use Ground News? No, but they've never sponsored me, so that's why. If they did, maybe.
The denigrating power of the N-word without the user ever having to say the N-word, thus allowing them to speak with dog whistle clarity to their group, aka the people who know what they're really saying, while providing just enough deniability against the accusations of people who intrinsically know what they mean. This is what Dr. Ian Haney Lopez describes as dog whistle politics, a way for politicians and public figures to signal to their base while maintaining just enough distance to deny accusations of bigotry.
Dog whistle politics? What's that? Let me give you some examples. Perhaps the most infamous example is Ronald Reagan campaigning in 1980 and complaining about welfare queens. Now, welfare queen, the term doesn't mention race on its surface. It's code. Nevertheless, the term conjures race. It conjures race in terms of the image of a poor African-American woman abusing the welfare system. And it conjures race in terms of who's being abused, the taxpayers, who implicitly are white.
Okay, so that's purpose number one of modern slurs, deniability. But purpose number two, I think, is more sinister and more important. Modern slurs trick well-meaning moderates into normalizing the language of bigotry. When I say that modern slurs are designed to trick well-meaning moderates into participating in bigotry, this is what I mean. When Trump and the far right says DEI or CRT or woke as a pejorative, they mean there are no doubt a couple of other slurs that I think could be swapped in for this one, but let's keep it simple. When they get you to say DEI as a pejorative, they know that you may or may not mean but it doesn't matter because they mean it as a slur, and they've already done the work to closely associate the term DEI with the idea of undeserving Black people or undeserving women or queer people. So you are knowingly or unknowingly helping to normalize their framing of the term. I actually saw a lot of this online just a couple of weeks ago during the Pete Hegseth confirmation. People were routinely calling him a DEI hire. And even if they meant it as a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, I think in a way they were helping to normalize the right-wing framing of this term by essentially saying that this undeserving person was getting a job entirely because of their race and their gender. Modern slurs help racist ideas rebrand into something more palatable for every generation while maintaining the systems, roadblocks, stigmas, and assumptions that keep society unequal. Historical examples truly abound. When the institution of slavery was no longer fashionable, it was rebranded into a colorblind justice system, where slavery was given a convenient loophole in the 13th Amendment, except as a punishment for crime. In key ways, America swapped the yucky term slave for the more acceptable term criminal, and Black bodies have been over-criminalized ever since, allowing the country to celebrate the moral high ground.
The reactionary gotcha mindset only helps move everyone to the right. Dude, it's not a reactionary gotcha mindset if you're criticizing like people actively trying to sanitize like ultimately white supremacist beliefs by utilizing more acceptable language and simultaneously still advocating for the same exact systems, okay, then it's not gotcha. It's just actively undermining the marketing purposes of the reactionary right. I mean, people using DEI as a gotcha for underqualified Trump nominees. Wait, what? I think that plays a role. I think that literally plays a role in the whole like DEI thing.
Of emancipation while simply engaging in slavery by another name. Going forward 100 years after the civil rights movement, Jim Crow terrorism was rebranded into more palatable terms like the war on crime and gerrymandering. But what was the war on crime? It was state-sanctioned violence against Black people predominantly, but marginalized communities more broadly. What is gerrymandering except for the dilution and disenfranchisement of people's votes, usually Black people? We use these terms not because they mean something different from the very injustices that people like MLK and Medgar Evers were fighting against. We use them because they are more palatable. They don't make us feel bad, and more importantly, they don't make us look like bad people. Today, the terms woke and DEI and CRT are being used to train a brand new generation into devaluing the ideas and social contributions and presence of Black people specifically and marginalized groups more broadly. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that we talk about the rise and hopefully the fall of the modern slur. And I mentioned the fall because I think that there is a solution to this problem. Truthfully, I think it's very simple. Only use these terms when you intend to convey their original meaning. When you say CRT, mean a complex academic and legal framework designed to interrogate the role of race.
Yeah, that was the funniest one because like it was so clearly just anything that mentioned Black people from the framework of like Black people's humanity, because like there's no fucking CRT in there's no CRT from K through 12. Like that's not going on. What you're mentioning is like if you were to talk about slavery from the perspective that assumes black people are human, because up until I would say recently, and even now, when we talk about slavery in school, what is one of the most common things that people say about the founding fathers? There was robust debate on slavery amongst the founding fathers, right? That statement in and of itself still holds on to this false notion that like black people themselves had no say in this process and were not human at the time. Okay? It is a totally ridiculous way to approach the subject matter. Like, what do you mean there was robust back and forth about the concept of owning humans? Like, that is, by the way, if they talk about the founding fathers and slavery at all, right? And before people say, oh, there was no conversation about this at all at school, like, okay, well, how the fuck did they explain the 3/5 rule, for example? You know what I mean? Like, obviously, there was mention of there was certainly mention of black people and slavery. Wait, are you saying they don't teach it anymore? No, I'm saying if they mention like founding fathers and slavery at all, the American education system oftentimes tried to make it seem like there was a spirited debate about the ethics of slavery amongst the founding fathers. Now, that in and of itself still obviously, when you're talking about history like that, you're basically saying that this was a simple disagreement, okay? A simple disagreement, a simple back and forth. Like, you can have robust conversations about, like, whether or not a Supreme Court should exist, okay? That's understandable. But when you're describing the founding fathers as people that just simply had disagreements over the ownership of humans, you are still in 2025 talking about this as though black people are not a part of the subject matter, a part of this conversation, and like their humanity does not matter in that very moment. Do you not understand what I'm saying? Like, that's always, maybe it's because I didn't grow up in America and I didn't go to American school, but to me, that always came across as like so strange, because when you say it like that, you're still in 2025 basically saying, yeah, black people just weren't people back then. It is what it is, you know? And I think a lot of the educational initiatives that have been falsely branded as CRT in recent years are initiatives that don't treat black people as non-human in 2025. They basically say black people are human. And that's usually what the big anger and resentment surrounding this new initiative is. You're so wrong about CRTs everywhere in schooling. I've seen it nonstop since starting my sociology degree. Yeah. Can you explain it in a different way? I don't understand what you are saying. I don't understand what you mean. The wealthy class did debate it and the slaves were slaves. They were oppressed and didn't have any say, or they wouldn't have been slaves. Whether or not the wealthy white slave owners and non-slave owners were having a robust discussion or back and forth does not change the reality that the slaves were still human and did not like being slaves, did not like being enslaved, and had no say in the matter. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, the greatest example I can give you with respect to George Washington is that there's this false notion that is super commonplace in, as far as I understand, like American schooling especially, that like George Washington has some slaves, but like he was really nice to them or whatever. That's a ridiculous assessment. He was not really fucking nice to them. He had slaves, okay? And I'll take it one step further. At the time when George Washington actually had slaves, clearly in Pennsylvania, there were rules that openly recognized that slavery was immoral. So much so that there was a rule in Pennsylvania, I think it was in Pennsylvania, or was it Virginia? Well, one or the other, that I'm fucking up the possible states, but there was rules in Pennsylvania that dictated that if you had slaves for longer than a certain period of time, you had to actually free them. Okay? So George Washington would constantly cycle his slaves from Pennsylvania to other states specifically as a loophole so that he could maintain them, so that he could keep them. This, to me, is enough for virtually everyone, including George Washington, to understand that this was an immoral concept. There was a law around it. There was a law around it, and he got around that law. Was there more to that story? No, it's actually just that. It sounds surreal. Nope, there is literally no more to that story. There were certain states that had rules around having slaves for longer than, I believe it was like a 6-month period or a 6-year period. If I might be fucking this rule up right now. And George Washington would consistently cycle his slaves out of the state and then bring them back in, specifically so he could use this loophole to continue having the same fucking slaves. It sounds insane, but that in and of itself, I think, yeah, here it is. George Washington used legal loopholes to avoid fleeing his slaves. One of his slaves fled to New Hampshire to escape becoming a wedding present. He had 150. America's first president was wealthy and powerful, and his positions included false teeth, tricorn hats, and nearly 150 slaves. George Washington owned slaves and relied on their labor, and as Erica Armstrong Dunbar reports for the New York Times, he used legal loopholes to avoid freeing them, even as northern states worked to abolish slavery. Washington inherited his first 10 slaves when he was just 10 years old, Dunbar reports. In the days before Washington, D.C. was the nation's capital, the new president lived in New York and Pennsylvania, states that were gradually abolishing slavery. But Washington wasn't eager to get rid of his own slaves, says Dunbar, even when he moved to Philadelphia. In 1970, Pennsylvania passed the Gradual Abolition Act, a law that freed people when they turned 28 and that automatically freed any slave who moved to the state and lived there for more than 6 months. Sorry, it was not 6 years, it was 6 months. Dunbar tells the story of how Washington got around it. Washington developed a canny strategy that would protect this property and allow him to avoid public scrutiny. Every 6 months, the president's slaves would travel back to Mount Vernon or would journey with Mrs. Washington outside the boundaries of the state. In essence, the Washingtons reset the clock. The president was secretive when writing to his personal secretary, Tobias Lear, in 1791. I request that these sentiments and this advice may be known to none but yourself and Mrs. Washington. Despite these attempts to hold on to his property, Ona Judge, a 22-year-old slave, escaped when she learned that Washington intended to give her to a relative as a wedding present. She made it to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where she married and began life as a free woman. Judge was one of the thousands of blacks who escaped to freedom, both independently and as a part of the loose network that would later be known as the Underground Railroad. The New England Historical Society reports that Washington was enraged by what he saw as Judge's ingratitude, and that he assumed she had been convinced to escape rather than deciding to run away on her own volition. It is certain that the escape had been planned by someone who knew what he was about and had the means to defray the expense of it and to entice her off, for not the least suspicion was entertained of her going or having formed a connection with anyone who could induce her to such an act. Despite 3 years of searching, Washington never recovered Judge. He searched for her for 3 years, And he was far from the last president to own slaves. Zachary Taylor, the 12th president, owned 100 slaves while in office. And Ulysses S. Grant, the 18th president, freed his slaves before the Civil War. Washington had a secret passageway built into his Philly home to hide his slaves from the guests while he had visitors. You can see this today if you visit the site. Yeah. Okay. So they knew slaves were people, but that wasn't the problem. Breaking the fledgling nation in half. If they just said slaves were people, understand. I think it's disgusting, but I think that was the calculus. You don't have to. you right now, when understanding what's going on, don't have to abide by those standards, especially after you come to the recognition that plenty of people consider this to be fucking abhorrent and immoral, because it then comes across as slavery apologia. It's kind of like how Republicans debate about owning Gaza with no regard to what the Palestinian opinion is, right? It's even closer to that. It's like the robust debate between what to do with the Palestinians between the Democrats and the Republicans, with very few actual politicians that truly care about the humanity of the subjects that we are talking about. Yeah. I think John Adams was one of the only founding fathers that didn't own slaves. No, John Adams was a G for sure. Also, Paul Giamatti played him in the HBO series. So, you know. He wasn't the only one that didn't have any slaves, but he was a G for sure. I don't know. It still feels important to understand what the political conversation looked like at the time since it's so important. No, I don't disagree with that. I'm not saying don't fucking teach history. I'm simply stating that it is the perspective. I think the commonly held opinion is that people simply didn't know that black people were human. That's not true. That's ahistorical. That's my point. That's all I'm saying. And CRT, or what they consider to be CRT, is basically a correct assessment of history that basically says, no, they knew that black people were people and they just didn't fucking care. Okay? That's it. So a lot of these things that these people call like CRT or DEI or woke or whatever is actually a correct and accurate assessment of history. But that is precisely the reason why I think Republicans hate it, because they'll say things like, oh, well, it's making my children feel bad about themselves. It's like, what the fuck? Why would they feel bad about this? You should feel bad because you think that like your kids learning about the correct history is somehow bad and wrong. Potential Hasan, I've had popping off on this exact
Accurate
topic.
History is teaching white Americans how white slave owners raped, beat, humiliated, mutilated, murdered, and cannibalized their slaves.
The cannibalization stuff is really fucking crazy. Didn't they also make like household items out of black people too? Like, it's
Accurate history is teaching that George Washington's false teeth were made out of his slaves' teeth. Accurate history is teaching that Abraham Lincoln may have said some words and signed some shit, but he did not physically do anything to free the slaves. The white abolitionists also often get almost total credit for freeing the slaves. I bet you've never even asked yourself what the slaves were doing to free themselves, and the answer to that is most of the fucking work, including giving the ultimatum of war. But then we get a bunch of white people mad that their kids might feel guilty if we teach real history. It's not about your white child's feelings. Teaching accurate history isn't about white people's feelings, but that does sound like something that someone who's only ever been taught a white glorifying version of history would counter with. Ask why we ever felt like we needed to curate a false version of what white people did and did not do to black people to begin with. And then ask yourself why white-ass politicians are verbally attacking real history by calling it slurs, which is, by default, also the act of calling black people slurs.
Stuff like scientific racism didn't exist at the beginning of the transatlantic slavery. It was made up after to justify slavery. So, of course, they knew that black people were human and had to do mental gymnastics to say they weren't. Yes. Like scientific racism, or even just racism in and of itself, is literally racism in the way that we understand it, like the anti-black racism in the way that we understand it, is quite literally white people playing catch up to try and justify it. Scientific racism is a more modern iteration of what we consider to be racism now anyway. In the past, slavery was commonplace, okay? Chattel slavery, on the other hand, is a totally unique phenomenon, okay? Slavery has been in practice throughout history, and some might even say slavery in practice still exists to this day, like the prison system, okay? However, there's a difference between other forms of slavery that vary. Okay, all of it is completely inappropriate and immoral, but different versions of slavery exist that historians will also actively point to and say, and will actively recognize is very different than chattel slavery, which most historians will consider to be uniquely evil. Okay. Some would say, get the fuck out. I'm just saying that, like, you know, chattel slavery is a uniquely evil version of the slavery structure. Slavery in the past was done to, you know, the losers of a battle, right? But it was done on the basis of not necessarily like the color of your skin or whatever, but mostly on the basis of your ethnicity. And it didn't carry over in most circumstances to your children. It was a practice of indentured servitude that you could basically pay your way out of. Not everyone did, obviously, but for the most part, it was not, there was, you know, sometimes terms limits. It was not hereditary. And it was based around the structure of like, well, you're a part of the peasant class that lost this battle. Having said that, chattel slavery is different because it's genetic and it was based upon the color of your skin and also was impossible to escape. Once white people decided, you know, this is the new game, this is the new meta in terms of slavery, they had to basically make up a reason for why this new version of slavery should exist. That's where racism comes in. It was all of a sudden not considered. It was all of a sudden not considered like, oh, well, you know, these guys, like there had to be a reason. There had to be a justification for why it was hereditary. Okay. And that justification was, oh, well, they're a different race and therefore not human. So you could justify treating them like livestock. I think modern slavery goes beyond color and ethnicity and stuff of the old era. Yes, of course. That's why I said it is a version of slavery that is very different than chattel slavery. Slavery for a single race was basically inaugurated by the Portuguese in the Americas. They had to make whole new rules to justify it, called the Black Code. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's the other part. Sorry. You're right. Fuck. Christianity. That's what I was thinking of. That's what I was trying to figure out. So there's also this aspect of it as well, because they converted their slaves to Christianity, and you can't enslave another Christian. They needed mental gymnastics to justify it. It went hand in hand with scientific racism. Exactly. Before scientific racism was developed in the end of the 1800s and the start of the 1900s, it was based on religious grounds. The Catholic Church, for example, said African people did not have souls, and indigenous Americans maybe half a soul. Skidmore wrote about that. Yeah. What were slaves originally? Prisoners of war? Yes. I mean, depending on where you're looking at geographically, but usually prisoners of war. But like the fascinating case of the Dev Shirman program for the Ottoman Empire, for example, which is why a lot of people will turn around and say, Hasan, you're actually glazing the Ottoman Empire, is a little different. Because the Dev Shirman program in the Ottoman Empire was literally fucking stealing non-Muslims. Okay, so on the basis of religion, once again, because the Ottoman Empire is Muslim, so they would basically take non-Muslim children through this development program, and in that structure, they either became some of the most important warriors, the Janissaries, which have some of the earliest versions of labor unions, by the way, famously, or at least labor militancy and labor action. Kazan Kaldırmak, I've talked about this before. Or even became like the highest, most educated architects, most educated viziers, most educated people in office. They were never obviously they never became the main guy, but they were capable of being elevated all the way to the highest levels of Ottoman society. I've heard libs like Bonerbox say Ottomans were the worst imperialists. What the fuck? I don't think any historian would agree with that unless they have like a serious bone to pick. Unless they're still operating on the sick man of Europe attitudes. The Ottomans, for the time, weren't they often castrated? No. The only slaves that were castrated were initially the only slaves, or some of the very few slaves that were black, because they were used in the what is the term for it? Holy shit. Fuck. I'm forgetting the no, not the eunuchs, the harem. Thank you. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm forgetting the harem, the word harem. So initially, in the harems, they used black slaves. Why they use black slaves? Because obviously, if the slaves that they were using in the harems had sex with the emperor's, concubines, then the child would come out half black. But that happened all the time. So then they chose to turn them into eunuchs, which is a horrifyingly disastrous and obviously insanely cruel method. But yeah, that's what they did. Even the white identity was created for wider expansion into Africa and chattel slavery, a whole new construct to unite imperial powers around to try to minimize the risk at home to focus for profit. Yeah. The first ever black pilot is a Turkish, one of the very few Afro-Turks that remain. First ever black pilot, like around the planet, around the globe, is a Turkish man. Ahmet Çelik, I think his name is. I've actually researched eunuchs in the Ottomans did have a full-on clean slate type of castration, meaning the penis was also fully removed. Yes. This is true. I've seen their hats. The eunuchs in the harems would have to wear a hat, and that hat had a piece of like a circular coin-looking piece of metal in the brim of the hat. And the reason why was because they had to use it to pee. It's fucking insane. They would have to literally take that metal coin and put it to where they, where they used to have their penises to be able to piss out of it. Yeah, horrifying shit. What happens to your body when you lose that testosterone production? Is it like andropause? I mean, there are very famous examples of castratus, for example. They used to practice gelding and different sorts of horrible practices like that for many different reasons. Yes, when your testosterone production is cut, you have a beautiful voice. Castratos. Basically, their justification for slavery was they gave them something back for being enslaved, like a higher social position at the end of it. Yeah. But there are also stories of like Muslim parents faking their children being Christian in an effort to put them through the Deb Schumer program, especially if they were like really fucking poor, because they were like, there's no other, ironically, upward social mobility prospects. Still, obviously, a horrifying practice, but very different than chattel slavery for obvious reasons. And ironically enough, hundreds of years before chattel slavery as well. So where did you learn this stuff? I'm a right winger, but I want to learn more about leftist social stuff. Brother, I'm Turkish. Do you think I know about this stuff exclusively because I just have like a random fascination? I love this guy coming in here thinking that I'm like a random American dude, but I just have a fascination with real deep lore with the Ottoman Empire. But yeah, no, I do give you credit for coming in here and wanting to learn more. Yeah, I'm just a weeb for the Ottomans. I think I made a good point about the education around slavery and historical examples of it. We also use our education system to muddy the waters around the different types of slavery, and will project aspects of chattel slavery onto other cultures throughout history, like Egypt or Rome, for example. They did do slavery, but they didn't do chattel slavery. We did it to make it look like what we did was less evil than it was. We whitewashed our use of slavery post-Civil War by using historical examples. Yeah, that's why whenever motherfuckers talk about like slavery still exists, or the Irish were enslaved or whatever the fuck, like no actual Irish person will fucking say that in comparison to chattel slavery. But Americans say that all the time. And the reason for why Americans say that all the time is because of that exact purpose, which is to downplay the historic severity of chattel slavery, not shadow for the chatters who have never heard this term, chattel slavery. Okay? Stay woke. It's surprising you are not glazing Ottomans and actually speak some truth about them. It's not surprising. I do that all the time. I have no reason to like shelter you guys from the truth. I don't like, who cares? I think what matters most is learning the truth. You don't do that with LeBron? Okay, calm down. I only say the truth about LeBron as well.
Racism in society and policy. When you say wokeness, do so as a way to express an awareness that systems of marginalization are everywhere and affect everything, and we can't afford to sleep while our rights are being compromised. When you say DEI, mean diversity, equity, and inclusion, mean anti-segregation, mean that your workplace or university has been a historically white and male institution, and that interrupting that trend is a good thing. What I'm saying is disrupt the way that bigots are co-opting language and creating new slurs by any means necessary. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it there. All of that I just said is what I think, but please tell me, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments, which is just below the like button. Huge shout out to everyone who is already subscribed. If you aren't, please consider doing so and join.
Hassan hates Donald Trump, but he said that he did good at stopping the bombardment of Palestine. Yeah, but I also said that there was a lot more evil to come from the Trump administration. Didn't the Barbary pirates sell 1.3 million white European slaves to the Ottoman Empire in North Africa between the 15th and 19th centuries? Yeah, get wrecked. I didn't say the Ottomans didn't practice slavery, dummy. I just literally spent the last hour describing the gruesome practices of slavery in the Ottoman Empire.